Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to pick up from previous examples using class. So in that one, we went through a couple steps to create a class with its basic variables. So we're going to leave this alone. What I'm more interested in is, so in this example here, we've created a total of 200 of these bubbles. And they're just moving around the scene. They're very transparent, and I'm not using a background element, so they're just piling up on top of each other for what it's worth. What I look at here is, so we have 200 of these, and we've created an array, right? So an array is a fixed list. So we have to declare that we're using an array and initialize it, and then we just go ahead and assign it and run it, right? So what I'm going to do here is look at using an array list. So an array list is a dynamic list. It's a way that we can say, well, I want 1, and then 2, and 3, and 4, and I can add a whole bunch, and I can even take those away. And I'm not going to really touch that part in this tutorial. It's maybe a part 2 talking about that part. And how you take something out of the list. But here, say if you're doing a particle system, or you want to cycle up and down through a list, array list is going to be the way to go. But the syntax is definitely different. So I usually stay away from that until students get very comfortable with the idea of using an array. Let's go ahead and look at how we use this. I do have the processing example page, which honestly has gone through several iterations of how they've tried to explain exactly how array lists work. I think this is pretty good. It breaks down some of the different components or the instances and how you would see it. So I'm going to do that here in this one. So let's start out. So instead of saying we're going to create a bubble that's going to be an array with B, let's start by saying that we're going to do an array list. I'm going to use these little square brackets here, and I'll come to that in a second. And then I'm just going to call this, let's call it my B. Okay. So I don't have to get rid of this one to first start. So I want to be able to compare. So this little, I'm going to put something in here, but I'm going to explain this in a second, right? So then we'll say it's going to be a new array list. Again, with these little brackets. And we close it off. Is a little function. Okay, so there are several different ways to use the array list and initialize it here, but I think this way of using what I believe these are called generics. I'm going to put these in here. Okay. So we're telling processing I'm going to have an array list. The type of things that are going to be in the list are the bubble, so the bubble class, and then of course I give it the variable name for this list. Okay, but this is the type of information that's going to be in the list. And then we say, hey, we're going to create this new array list that again has these bubbles in it. Some of the older school tutorials, you might see them not using these and going about this slightly different. I think this is the way to go. It's just simpler. You might as well get it out of the way when you're assigning that. All right, so that's working there. So in the array, we have to tell it how big that array is going to be. So I did it up here, right? You could also see sometimes something where it might say B equals new bubble. Sorry, my typing's terrible tonight. All right, so that works as well. And then we go ahead and we create however many total bubbles that we want. Right? So I'm just going to go ahead and, in fact, I'll just leave that there, I guess. I'm not going to do anything. But instead of creating a whole bunch of them off the bat, what I want to do is just create one for the array list. Because what I'm going to do is add to this. So I'm just going to say my B, add a new bubble here would be the constructor. In our class, we don't have anything in there, so this is where those arguments would go, just as normal. We close that off. And just so we can see this run, I'm going to comment out that one. And okay, so I've added a new bubble, but I need to run that bubble. So I have this part running, but I haven't done anything with it, right? So I've declared and initialized that. I've created one of the bubbles and added it to the thing. In fact, I could say integer b total equals whatever my b dot size is. And then I'm going to say print the b total. So if I come down here, hopefully I'll see 1. Okay, so I told it to add that to the scene, and then I create a little variable. I could have just maybe put this all inside there. That's just the way I do it. So instead of length that you would have for an array, the size, and we have to use these little function parentheses, because this is a method basically for the array list, right? Okay, so we've done that. So what's the last little piece of this is we need to run through just like we would the other, but this time let's go ahead and copy this. And let's just keep all that commented out. All right, so there's 2 ways to go through this if we look at the documentation. And what I'm going to do is a lot of times when I'm using this, it's for particles that I might want to create or destroy. So it's probably a better idea if you want to look at each individual one to use this method. And they talk about it over here, where they would have the just a traditional for loop as we count through the elements, or we can use this enhanced loop, which most of you have probably not seen this before. I don't even use this one that much because I'm always using the index value to be able to do things to particles, right? So first of all, total, we're not going to use that. We're going to say, again, exactly what we had up here is not might be size is as big as the particle system setup is. And then we just say bubble, and let's call this b2 equals my b dot get. Okay, so this might seem a little weird. I'll come back to it and explain it. Let's do b2 dot run. Right, so the bubble class has a run function, right? So we're using that, we're just using a different listing system, right? We're going to do this, a dynamic list. So, and I'm no CS and I'm no computer science person, but the way I think about this little step right here, which seems different, like why do I have to create a new bubble to run as I go through the list? So basically I say, let's create a bubble and we'll just call it, B2 or whatever it is. And we want to make it equal to whatever bubbles are already in the list. And it's like a proxy for it, right? So we reach down to the list, we get that information from that specific one, and then we run it as a proxy. And this basically, as far as I can tell, is just it allows us to reach down into the list and remove or add to them, right? So it's like protecting the list just in case we decide, hey, you know what, delete one of these bubbles, my b dot whatever this would be, right? So right now we're just saying, let's go through as big as the list is, and at this point it should be 1, right? And let's create a proxy for that. So we'll just create a new bubble, just b2, and let's make it equal to however many are in the list, and then we'll just go ahead and run that, right? And you can see I have one bubble in the scene, right? And it's just dancing along again. This is just kind of transparent, and we're not using a background. Okay, so let's see, how could we make this a little more dynamic? I'm going to say mouse pressed. So we're going to create a little event. So every time I press the mouse, let's go ahead and add a new bubble. All right, so click, 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 right? So I can keep adding these bubbles to the scene, and maybe what I can do down here is say print id.size. All right, let's try that again. That's funny, it put the 2 right on top of it. That's funny. Right? 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. All right. And if I wanted to, I could write some fancier code. I did this as a little example earlier. I don't think I have time for this tutorial. Where I could measure the distance between the mouse and the XY of any of these bubbles. And instead of saying bubble add, I could say bubble remove. Okay. But in that instance, we'd have to tell it which one of the bubbles, right? Here we're just adding one, and it just adds it to the back of the list. And there's some documentation here. You might want to read through it where it talks about the fact that if you want to remove them so that it make sure that it runs through the full list, you might want to count backwards. And there's a good example, I think, in chapter 5 of Dan Schiffman's Nature of Code book about how ArrayLists, how processing treats those ArrayLists, or Java basically treats those ArrayLists. Okay, so let's recap here. So the nice thing is that with the ArrayList, we don't have to tell it how many we're going to use right off the bat. It can always go up or down. Of course, we don't need that anymore, right? We're not using this. And at the very beginning, we're just going to add one of these. In fact, we also could just, very beginning, we could just take that out of there. Okay, so right now there's no bubbles in the scene, right? So this would be great if you had like a particle moving across the scene and it crashes into the side and you want it to all of a sudden say, oh, let's put a bubble there. You can just add that at that time during that event in a conditional statement, right? But we're just using something simple. So I just say mouse pressed, blah, 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 and I've added a bubble. If I rewrote my code, I could put X and Y with a little placeholder in here so that when I clicked in the scene, that bubble would start wherever I clicked my mouse, right? Right now it's just firing it off and it's putting randomly anywhere on the screen. Okay, so let's see, is there anything else I should mention here? So remember, size with the brackets is the way we can access how long the list is. It's a good idea to use this print at the very beginning. Oh, that's why I did that. So when you use the print line, it's a good idea to put it in here so you know that what the total of your array list is, just to debug, make sure it's working. And again, we'll use the for loop again with the size for that list. And then here's the tricky part. This whole idea that we're going to create a separate bubble and we'll call it B2, and it's going to be a copy of each one that we get through the list, right? So it gets the first one, runs that on the screen, does whatever it's going to do to draw it here, and then it does the second one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one, running it, right? So those all end up back on the screen. All right, I hope this helps.